Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Om Ganana Antva Ganapatigam Mavamahe Kavinam Upavashravastramam Jeshtarajam Brahmanan Brahmanaspada Anushrunnoti Bisni Rasadanam. Om Mahaganadipataye Namaha. Om Keshwa Om Narayana Namaha. Om Madhvaya Namaha. Om Govindaya Namaha. Om Vishnave Namaha. Matsudaya Namaha. Trivikramaya Namaha. Vamanaya Namaha. Sridharaya Namaha. Rishikeshaya Namaha. Padmanabhaya Namaha. Damodara Sankarshnaya Namaha. Vasudevaya Namaha. Pradyumnaya Namaha. Niruddhaya Namaha. Purushottamaya Namaha. Dokshaya Namaha. Narasimhaya Namaha. Achyutaya Namaha. Janardhanaya Namaha. Upendraya Namaha. Hare Namaha. Sri Krishna Namaha. Sorry for the delay today. Computer giving some trouble today. We came to the, dear friends, we came to the 86th chapter of Dashamaskanda of Bhagavata Purana. In this chapter, the description of how Arjuna kidnapped Subhadra and how Lord Krishna went to Mithila to bless his devotees of Bhulushva and Shrutadeva. When King Parikshit desired to learn about the marriage of his grandmother, Subhadra Devi, Sri Sukadeva Goswami said, while touring on pilgrimage, Arjuna heard that Balarama intended to give the hand of his sister Subhadra to Duryodhana in marriage. Wanting to kidnap Subhadra and marry her himself, Arjuna disguised himself as a renunciant and went to Dwaraka like a saint. So effective was the disguise that neither Balarama nor any other resident of Dwaraka can recognize him. Rather, they all showed him the respect due to Vaishnava sannyasi. In this way, the 4 months of the rainy season passed. That was called Chaturmasa. In Chaturmasa, saints will take a special puja in the Chaturmasa. That's the rainy season. And in that 4 months, he became a Vaishnava saint. In this way, the 4 months of the rainy season passed. One day, Arjuna received an invitation to dine at the Lord Balarama's home. There he caught sight of Subhadra and was immediately overwhelmed with the desire for her. Subhadra also desired to have Arjuna as her husband, and thus she glanced back at him slyly. A few days later, Subhadra left the palace to participate in a chariot festival. Taking this opportunity, Arjuna abducted Subhadra and defeated the Yadavas who tried to stop him. Lord Balarama was at first greatly angered to hear of this, but when Lord Sri Krishna and other family members specified him, he became joyful and sent the bride and groom off with elaborate wedding gifts. There was a Brahmana devotee of Sri Krishna named Shrutadeva who lived in the city of Mithila. By the will of providence, he could earn only barely enough to keep himself and his family alive. Still, he was always satisfied and spent all his time executing his religious duties. King Bhulushva was another great devotee of the Lord, residing in Mithila. A member of the dynasty in which King Janaka had appeared, Bhulushva ruled over the whole province of Videha Rajya, yet he remained as detached from material wealth as Shrutadeva. Pleased with the devotional attitude of both these great souls, Lord Krishna went on his chariot to Mithila to visit them, taking along the Narada and several other learned sages. The people of Mithila greeted the Lord and his saintly entourage with great delight. Bearing various gifts for Krishna, they bowed down and offered obeisance to both him and the sages. Bhulashva and Shrutadeva both stepped forward and respectfully requested Lord Krishna to visit their homes. To satisfy both of them, Lord expanded himself and went to each of their homes simultaneously. Lord Krishna became two reflections, and one reflection went to Bhulashva's house, another reflection went to Shrutadeva's house simultaneously at the same time. They each worshipped him suitably, offered prayers, washed his feet, and then sprinkled themselves and all their family members with the water. Lord Krishna then praised the sages who were with him and glorified Brahmanas in general. He also imparted instructions to his host concerning the devotional service. Understanding these instructions, both Shrutadeva and Baulashva honored the sages and Lord Sri Krishna with single-minded devotion. Lord Krishna then returned to Dwaraka. This is the summary of this chapter, and the shloka number 1 starts with Raja Uvacha. Brahman veditumichhama swastaram Ramakrishnayo yatopayeme vijayo yamama sita pitamahi. Parikshit Raja is asking Shuka Maharshi this question. O Brahmana, we would like to learn how Arjuna married Lord Balrama's and Lord Krishna's sister, who was my grandmother. Parikshit Maharaja turns now to the topic of the marriage of Lord Krishna's sister Subhadra. In the opinion of Srila Sridhara Swami, King Parikshit's question here follows from the previous narration, because Arjuna's winning the hand of Subhadra was just as difficult a feat as Lord Krishna's retrieving the sons of Devaki from the realm of the dead, since Lord Balarama himself opposed Subhadra's marriage to Arjuna. Shuka Maharshi is answering this question. Shuka Maharshi said, while traveling far and wide visiting various holy places of pilgrimage in India, Arjuna came to Prabhasa Kshetra. There he heard that Lord Balarama intended to give his maternal cousin Subhadra to Duryodhana in marriage, and that no one else approved of this plan. Arjuna wanted to marry her himself, so he disguised himself as a saint or a renunciant, complete with triple staff, and went to Dwaraka Nagara. Arjuna's plan for obtaining Subhadra as his wife may have seemed unconventional, but he was not acting without encouragement. In fact, Lord Krishna was his prime co-conspirator. And in Dwaraka, most of the members of the royal family, especially Vasudeva, were unhappy about giving their favorite daughter to Duryodhana. He stayed there during the monsoon months to fulfill his purpose of Chaturmasa time. Lord Balarama and other residents of the city, not recognizing him as real Arjuna, offered him all honor and hospitality, thinking he is a Vaishnava saint. One day, Lord Balarama brought him to his home. He invited dinner guests, and Arjuna ate the food with the Lord respectfully offered him. From the explanation of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, it is understood that Arjuna, in his sannyasi role, had just finished the 4-month oaths of trainee season and could now again accept general invitation from householders. Thus, no one would have suspected any unusual motive in his visiting Lord Balarama at that time. There he saw the wonderful maiden Subhadra, who was enchanting to heroes. His eyes opened wide with delight, and his mind became agitated and absorbed in thoughts of her. Arjuna was very attractive to women as well, and as soon as Subhadra saw him, she wanted to have him as her husband. Smiling bashfully with sidelong glances, she fixed her heart and eyes upon him. As soon as she saw him, Subhadra knew that Arjuna was no sannyasi, but rather destined consort. In Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada elaborates, Arjuna, the grandfather of Maharaja Parikshit, was himself extraordinarily beautiful and very handsome, and his bodily structure was very attractive to Subhadra. Subhadra also decided within her mind that she should accept only Arjuna as her husband. As a simple girl, she was smiling with great pleasure looking at Arjuna. Meditating only on her and waiting for opportunity to take her away, Arjuna had no peace. His heart trembled with passionate desire. Even while being honored by Lord Balarama, Arjuna was too distracted to appreciate the Lord's gracious hospitality. Arjuna's distraction and Lord Balarama's failure to recognize Arjuna in his disguise were both arrangements of the Supreme Lord Krishna to enjoy his transcendental pastimes. Lord Krishna arranged this to happen. Once, the occasion of a great temple festival in honor of the Supreme Lord, Subhadra rode out of fortress-like palace on a chariot, and at that time, the mighty chariot warrior Arjuna took the opportunity to kidnap her. Subhadra's parents, Krishna Subhadra's parents and Krishna had sanctioned this. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti identifies this festival as the annual Rathayatra of our Lord Vishnu on the occasion of his rising from mystic sleep at the end of Chaturmasya. Subhadra's parents are Vasudeva. Subhadra's parents, Vasudeva and Devaki. Subhadra's parents are Vasudeva and Devaki. Standing on his chariot, Arjuna took up his bow and drove off the valiant fighters and palace guards who tried to block his way. As a relative shouted in anger, he took Subhadra away just as a lion takes his prey from the midst of other animals. When he heard of Subhadra's kidnapping, Lord Balarama became disturbed as the ocean during the full moon, but Lord Krishna respectively took hold of his feet and together with other family members pacified him by explaining the matter. Lord Balarama then happily sent the bride and groom very valuable wedding gift consisting of elephants, chariots, horses, and male and female servants. Shukadeva Goswami continued, there was a devotee of Krishna known as Shrutadeva, who was first-class Brahmana, perfectly satisfied by rendering unalloyed devotional service to Lord Krishna. He was peaceful, learned, and free from sense gratification. Living as a religious householder in the city of Mithila, within the kingdom of Videha Rajya, he managed to fulfill his obligations while maintaining himself with whatever sustenance easily came his way. By the will of the providence, he obtained each day just what he needed for his maintenance and no more. Satisfied with this much, he properly executed his religious duties. An ideal Vaishnava Brahmana, even if encumbered by the ties of his family life, should work only as hard as required to meet his obligations. Without being unnecessarily agitated for material advancement, he should devote the best part of his time and assets to his higher duties in the Supreme Lord's service. If a householder can succeed in this program, despite the unavoidable difficulties of this degraded age, he can expect Lord Krishna's personal attention, as will be seen in the case of Shrutadeva, the perfect Brahmana of Mithila. Similarly, free from false ego, was the ruler of the kingdom, my dear Parikshit, a descendant of the Mithila dynasty named Bhulashva. Both these devotees were very dear to Lord Achyuta or Lord Krishna. Pleased with the both of them, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, mounted his chariot which Daruka had brought and traveled to Videha with a group of sages. In his commentary on this verse, Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti states that Shrutadeva and Bhulashva were unable to travel to Dwaraka to Sri Lord Krishna because both of them had vowed to regularly worship their personal deity at home. Sri Krishna was very glad to go out of his way to give them both his audience, and while leaving Dwaraka, he insisted that the sages who wanted to come with him should join him on his chariot, because otherwise they would exhaust themselves following on foot. Renowned sages would ordinarily never even consider traveling in such an opulent conveyance, but on the Lord's order, they put aside their natural aversion and joined him in his chariot. Among these sages were Narada, Vamadeva, Atri, Krishnadvaipayana, Vyasamarshi, Parashurama, Asita, Aruni, and myself. That means Shuka Maharshi, Brihaspati, Kanva, Maitreya, and Chamana. In every city and town, the Lord passed along the way. O king, the people came forward to worship him with offerings of arghya, water in their hands, as if to worship the rising sun surrounded by planets. Here the sages traveling with Krishna on his chariot are likened to planets around the sun. The men, women of Anartha, Dhanva, Kurujangala, Kanka, Matsya, Panchala Desha, Kaunti Desha, Madhu Desha, Kaikeyi Desha, Kosala Desha, Aranya Desha, and many other kingdoms drank with their eyes the nectarian beauty of Lord Krishna's lotus-like face, which was graced with generous smiles and affectionate glances. He went through so many states in the between his journey. Simply by glancing at those who came to see him, Lord Krishna, the spiritual master of the three worlds, delivered them from the blindness of materialism. As he thus endowed them with fearlessness and divine vision, he heard gods and men singing his glories, which purify the entire universe and destroy all misfortune. Gradually, he reached Vaidehi. Srila Jiva Goswami raises the logical question of how the ordinary people along the path could even see the Lord, since not only were their eyes covered by ignorance, but the Lord's chariot was traveling faster than the wind, supplying the answer. Srila Jiva Goswami indicates that Lord Krishna's special glance of mercy empowered every one of them with the devotional purity required for entering into his association. Otherwise, he could have remained outside the scope of their power to see, as he himself states in his instructions to Uddhava, Bhaktyayam ekaya grahaya. I can be perceived only by devotion. By the grammatical rule of compound formation known as eksesha, the term sta, vikshana, vinasta, tamsra, drigya, although in its primary sense inflected as a masculine noun, may be understood in this context as referring to both men and women, as a plural word. Hearing that Lord Achyuta had arrived, O king, the residents of the cities and villages of Vaidehi Rajya joyfully came forth to receive him, Lord Krishna, with offerings in their hands. As soon as the people saw Lord Uttama Shloka, here the Krishna is written as Uttama Shloka, their faces and hearts blossomed with affection. Joining their palms above their heads, they bowed down to the Lord like this, to the sages accompanying him, whom they had previously only heard about. Both the king of Mithila and Shrutadeva fell at the Lord Krishna's feet, each thinking that the spiritual master of the universe had come there just to show him mercy. At exactly the same time, King Mithila and Shrutadeva each went forward with giant palms and invited the Lord Krishna to be his guest, along with the Brahmin sages. Both invited both sages and Lord Krishna. Wanting to please them both, the Lord accepted both their invitations. Thus, he simultaneously went to both homes, and neither could see him entering the other's house. So, Lord Krishna made his own expansion twice to attend both the houses simultaneously. This never happened in any other avatars. In Krishna Avatara only we can see this sort of Krishna Leela. According to Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti, Krishna visited Shrutadeva and Bulashva at the same time by manifesting himself in a duplicate forms, along with the sages. Thus King Bulashva thought that Lord Krishna had come only to his house, leaving Shrutadeva to return home disappointed, while Shrutadeva believed that just the reverse of the case. In Krishna, Srila Prabhupada remarks that Lord Krishna and his companions were present in both houses, although both the Brahmana and the king thought he was present in his house only, is another opulence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This opulence is described in the revealed scriptures as Vaibhava Prakasha. Lord Krishna expansion is called Vaibhava Prakasha. Similarly, then Lord Krishna married 16,000 wives. He also expanded himself into 16,000 grooms, each one of them as powerful as he himself. Similarly, in Vrindavana, when Brahma stole away Krishna's cows and covered boys, Krishna expanded himself into many, many new cows, and covered boys. So you see, these are the Krishna's expansion we can see in the Krishna Leela. It's not possible to see this sort of incident in any other avatars of Vishnu. When King Bhulashva, a descendant of Janaka, saw Lord Krishna approaching his house from a distance with the sages, who were somewhat fatigued from the journey, he immediately arranged to have seats of honor brought out for them. After they were all comfortably seated, the wise king, his heart overflowing with joy and his eyes clouded by tears, bowed down to them and washed their feet with intense devotion. That's called Argya Padya. They have given the water to feet, washing the feet, and then Argya to wash their hand. Taking the washed water, which would purify the entire world, he sprinkled it on his head and the heads of his family members. Then he worshipped all those great lords by offering them fragrant sandalwood paste. The king Balashva worshipped all those great lords by offering them fragrant sandalwood paste, flower garlands, fine clothing, and ornaments, incense lamps, argya, and cows and bulls. So, Srila Prabhupada comments, Bhulashva, the king of Vaidehi, was very intelligent and was a perfect gentleman. He was astonished that so many great sages, along with the Supreme Personal Godhead, were personally present in his house. He couldn't believe. He knew perfectly well that conditioned souls engaged in worldly affairs cannot be 100% pure, whereas the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his pure devotees are always transcendental to worldly contamination. Therefore, when he found that Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna and all the great sages were at his home, he was astonished and he began to thank Lord Krishna for his costless mercy. The word Ishvara in this verse refers not only to the Supreme Lord, but also to the extent exalted sages in his company. This is confirmed by Acharya Sridhar Swami and Vishwanath Chakravarti in their comments. When they had eaten to their full satisfaction, for their further pleasure, the king began to speak slowly and in a gentle voice as he held Lord Vishnu's feet in his lap and happily massaged them. The king Bhulashva said, O Almighty Lord, you are the soul of all created beings, their self-illumined whiteness, and now you are giving your audience to us, who constantly meditate on your lotus feet. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti explains Bhulashva, the king of Vaidehi, inner thoughts as follows. Bhulashva glorifies Lord Krishna as the inspiring soul of all life and consciousness, thinking that even an inert dullard like himself could be awakened to devotional awareness. By his mercy, he glorifies the Lord as the witness of all pious and impious actions, confident that the Lord remembers whatever little devotional service he has ever done. And he glorifies him as self-illumined, never needing to be enlightened or informed by any external source. With the knowledge that Lord has always been aware of Bhulashva's long-cherished secret desire to see him. You have said, neither Ananta, goddess Sri, nor unborn Brahma is dearer to me than my unalloyed devotee. To prove your own words true, you have now revealed yourself to our eyes. You have said, neither Ananta, goddess Sri, nor unborn Brahma is dearer to me than my unalloyed devotee. To prove your own words true, you have now revealed yourself to our eyes. What person who knows this truth would ever abandon your lotus feet? When you are ready to give your very self to peaceful sages who call nothing their own. Appearing in the Edu dynasty, you have spread your glories, which can remove all the sins of the three worlds, just to deliver those entrapped in the cycle of birth and death. The king Bhulashva is talking to Krishna all this. In this prayer, he says, Namastubhyam Bhagavate Krishnaya Kuntamedase Narayanaya Rushaye Sushantam Tapayushe. This is 35th sloka of this chapter. Bhulashva is praying Lord Krishna like this. Namastubhyam Bhagavate Krishnaya Kunta Medase Narayana Rushaye Sushanta Tapaiyashe. It's a very nice devotional prayer of Bhaulashva, the king of Vaidehi, to Lord Krishna. Obeisance is to you, Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, whose intelligence is ever unrestricted. Obeisance is to the sage Naranayana, Naranarayana, who always undergoes austerities in perfect peace. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti comments that the king offered these prayers to encourage Lord Krishna to remain at his house for some days. The king thought, since contact with the Supreme Lord can free anyone from misconceptions and doubts, Krishna's presence in my home will fortify my intelligence so that I can withstand the onslaughts of material desires. In his expansion as Naranarayana Rishi, the Lord always resides in Badrikashrama for the good of the whole land of Bharata. And so he may also create good fortune for the land of Mithila by remaining here for at least few days. Since Lord Krishna's propensity is toward peace and simplicity, he will certainly prefer my simple home to the excessive opulence of Dwarka. That's what King Bhaulashva thought in his own mind. Please stay a few days in our house, along with these Brahmanas, O all-pervading one, and with the dust of your feet, sanctify this dynasty of Nimi. Shuka Maharshi says, thus invited by the king Bhaulashva, the Supreme Lord, sustainer of the world, consented to stay for some time to bestow good fortune on the men and women of Mithilapura. Text 38. Shruta-devochutam praptam sugrahanvako yatha natva munin sumsrudo sursto dhananyaso namartaha. Shrutadeva received Lord Achyuta into his home with as much enthusiasm as that shown by King Bhaulashva. After bowing down to the Lord and the sages, Shrutadeva began to dance with great joy, waving his shawl. After bringing mats of grass and darba, straw, and seating his guests upon them, he greeted them with words of welcome. Then he and his wife washed their feet with great pleasure. To provide even this simple welcome, Shrutadeva had to go next door to his neighbors and borrow extra mats. This insight is provided by Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti. With the water, the virtuous Shrutadeva copiously sprinkled himself, his house, and his family. Overjoyed, he felt that all his desires had now been fulfilled. He worshipped them with offerings of auspicious items easily available to him, such as fruits, uchara root, pure nectarian water, fragrant clay, tulsi leaves, kusha grass, and lotus flowers. Then he offered them food that increases the mode of goodness. He has fed them with sattvika ahara. He wondered, how is it that I fallen into the blind well of family life, have been able to meet Lord Krishna, and how have I also been allowed to meet these great sages and brahmanas who always carry the Lord within their hearts. Indeed, the dust of their feet is the shelter of all holy places. When his guests were seated comfortably, having each received a proper welcome, Shrutadeva approached them and sat down nearby with his wife, children, and other dependents. Then, while massaging Lord's feet, he addressed Krishna and the sages. Shrutadeva vacha. So, Shrutadeva is worshipping Lord Krishna. How lucky Shrutadeva is. Nadyano darshanam praptaha param paramapurushaha yarhidim shakti srustva pravishto hatu sattaya. When his guests were seated, while massaging the Lord's feet, he addressed Krishna and the sages, and he started his prayer. Shrutadeva said, it is not that we have attained the audience of the Supreme Person only today, for we have in fact been associating with Lord Krishna and Vishnu ever since he created this universe with his energies and then entered it in his transcendental form. The Lord is like a sleeping person who creates a separate world in his imagination and then enters his own dream and sees himself within it. In the illusion of his dream, a sleeping person creates an apparent world, complete with cities, populated by the fictional products of his imagination. In somewhat the same way, the Lord manifests the cosmos. Of course, the creation is not illusory of the Lord. Of course, the creation is not illusory for the Lord, but it is for those souls who are put under the control of his Maya potency. As our service to the Lord, Maya deludes the conditioned souls into accepting as real her temporary insubstantial manifestations. You reveal yourself within the hearts of those persons of pure consciousness who constantly hear about you, chant about you, worship you, glorify you, and converse the one with one another about you. But although you reside within the heart, you are very far away from those whose minds are disturbed by their entanglement in the material world. Indeed, no one can grasp you by his material powers, for you reveal yourself only in the hearts of those who have learned to appreciate your transcendental qualities. The all merciful Lord in everyone's heart, seeing him there, however, is possible only when one's heart is completely purified without any materialistic ideas. Materialists may demand that God prove his existence by coming into view as a result of their empirical investigations. But God has no need to respond to such impudency. As Lord Krishna states in Bhagavad Gita, I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them, I am covered by my internal potency, and therefore they do not know that I am unborn and infallible. Shloka number 48. Namostu te dhyatmavidham padatmane paratmane anatmane swatma vibhukta muttve sakarana karana lingameshe somaya swamrutta rudrusdishtaye. I am reading only shlokas, some of the shlokas, which is very nice. Let me offer my obeisance unto you. Shrutadeva says to Krishna, let me offer my obeisance unto you. You are realized as the Supreme Soul by those who know the absolute truth. Whereas in your form of time, you impose death upon the forgetful souls. You appear both in your costless spiritual form and in the created form of this universe, thus simultaneously uncovering the eyes of your devotees and obstructing the vision of the non-devotees. So Lord Krishna gives a proper direction to his own devotees and obstructing the vision of the non-devotees. When the Lord appears before his devotees in his eternal spiritual form, their eyes become uncovered in the sense that all vestiges of illusion are dispelled and they drink in the beautiful vision of the absolute truth. The personality of Godhead for the non-devotees, on the other hand, the Lord appears as a material nature, his universal form, and in this way, he covers their vision so that his spiritual personal form remains invisible to them. Srilala Vishwanatha Chakravarti gives another interpretation of this verse based on an alternative understanding of Anantamane, Anatmane, a form of the word Anatma. Various classes of men know the absolute truth in different ways. The devotees of the Lord Krishna who are in the reciprocal mode of neutral admiration is Santarsha. Meditate on the Supreme as possessing a divine personal form. Atma or Sri Vigraha. Atma or Sri Vigraha, a transcending all aspects of material illusion. The impersonal philosophers, Jnanis, conceive of him as formless, Anatma, and the envious demons see him in the form of death. Satvam shadi sabrutyan na kim deva karabhamahe etadanto nunam kleto yadbhamani kshigocharaha. This is the 49th sloka of the chapter. Shrutadeva is telling, O Lord, you are that supreme soul, and we are your servants. How shall we serve you? My Lord, simply seeing you puts an end to all the troubles of human life. Simply seeing you put an end to all the troubles of the human life. That's what Shrutadeva said. Shukavacha, Shuka Maharshi is telling Parikshit Raj, after hearing Shrutadeva speak these words, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who relieves his surrendered devotees' distress, took Shrutadeva's hand in his own and smiling spoke to him as follows. How lucky Shrutadeva is. Lord Krishna taken Shrutadeva's hand on his own hand and then smiling spoke to him as follows. Bhagavanuvacha brahmastenu grahartaya sampraptan viddamun munin sancharanti maya lokan punantaha padarenubihi. Padarenubihi. This is what Krishna is telling to Shrutadeva. Supreme Lord Krishna said, my dear Brahmana, you should know that these great sages have come here just to bless you. They travel throughout the worlds with me, purifying them with the dust of their feet. Srila Sridhara Swami explains that Lord Krishna thought Shrutadeva had shown too much reverence to him and not enough to the sages, and thus he turned the Brahmanas' attention to them. One can gradually become purified by seeing, touching, and worshipping temple deities, places of pilgrimage, and holy rivers, but one can attain the same result immediately simply by receiving the glance of exalted sages. Rather than remaining in seclusion and concentrating on their own perfection, Vaishnava Brahmanas of the highest order dedicate their lives to sharing the benediction of the Lord's devotion service. In the words of the sons of King Prachina Barhi, in the words of the sons of the King Prachina Barhi, dear Lord, your personal associates, your devotees wander all over the world to purify even holy places of pilgrimage. Is not such activity pleasing to those who are actually afraid of material existence? And Prahlada Maharaja says, my dear Lord Narasimhadeva, I see that there are many saintly persons indeed, but they are interested only in their own deliverance, not caring for the big cities and towns. They go to the Himalayas or the forest to meditate with vows of silence, Maunavrata. They are not interested in delivering others. As for me, however, I do not wish to be liberated alone, leaving aside all these poor fools and rascals. I know that without Krishna's consciousness, without taking shelter of your lotus feet, one cannot be happy. Therefore, I wish to bring them back to the shelter of your lotus feet. Shloka number 53. Deva kshetrani tirthani darshana sparshanarchanai shanai punanti kalena tadapyartamekshaya brahmano janmanashrain sarvesham praninamya tapasa vidyaya tushta kim mutkalaya yutaha. Kim mutkalaya yutaha. By his very birth, Brahmana is the best of all living beings in this world, and he becomes even more exalted when he is endowed with austerity, learning, and self-satisfaction. What to speak of devotion to me? Na brahmanena na brahmanayan medayatam rupam achyutarpuja chaturbhujam sarvamedamayo vipraha sarvadevo bhayam. Even my own four-armed form is no dearer to me than Brahmana. Within himself, a learned Brahmana comprises all the Vedas, just as within myself, I comprise all the gods. It is understood from the Vedic science of epistemology, the Nyaya Shastra. Epistemology is a Nyaya Shastra, that knowledge of an object, prameya, depends on valid means knowing pramana. Supreme Personality of Godhead can be known only by means of the Vedas. Supreme Personality of Godhead can be known only by means of the Vedas, and thus he relies on the Brahmana sages, who are the Vedas personified, to reveal him in this world, even though Lord Krishna embodies all the demigods and Vishnu Tattva, expansions of Narayana, he considers himself obliged to the Brahmanas. Lord Krishna embodies all the gods and Vishnu Tattva, expansion of Narayana, he considers himself obliged to the Brahmanas. It is understood from the Vedic science of epistemology, the Nyaya Shastra, that knowledge of an object, prameya, depends on a valid means of knowing pramana. Supreme Personality of Godhead can be known only by means of the Vedas, and thus he relies on the Brahmana sages, who are the Vedas personified, to reveal him in this world, even though Lord Krishna embodies all the gods and Vishnu Tattva, expansion of Narayana, he considers himself obliged to the Brahmanas. Dustajna avidetye mama vajanantya soyavaha gurumma vipramatmanamarchada prijadrishtayaha. Ignorant of this truth, foolish people neglect and enviously offend a learned Brahmana, who, being not different from me, is their spiritual master and very self. They consider worshipable only such obvious manifestations of divinity as my deity form. Because he has realized me, a Brahmana is firmly fixed in this knowledge that everything moving and non-moving in the universe, and also the primary elements of its creation, are all manifest forms expanded from me. Because he has realized me, a Brahmana is firmly fixed in the knowledge that everything moving and non-moving in the universe, and also the primary elements of its creation, are all manifest forms expanded from me. Tasmad Brahma Rushinetan Brahmanya Machadrayachayah Evam Chedirchito Smradhan Lata Bhuri Bhutibihi. Therefore, you should worship these Brahmana sages. O Brahmana, with the same faith you have in me. If you do so, you will worship me directly, which you cannot do otherwise, even with offerings of vast richness. Shukavacha Sayitta Brahmanam Dishtam Saha Krishnan Dujottaman Araidye Katma Bhavena Maitilascha Pasadgatim. Shukha Maharshi said, so instructed by his Lord Krishna, with a single-minded devotion, Shrutadeva worshipped Sri Krishna, and the topmost Brahmanas accompanying him and King Bhaulashva did the same in his palace. Thus both Shrutadeva and the king attained the ultimate transcendental destinations. Lord Krishna blessed both of them. Evam Swabhaktena, Evam Swabhaktayo Rajan, Bhagavan Bhakta Bhaktiman, Ushitva Dishya Sanmargam, Punardvaravati Magat. O king, thus the personality of Godhead, who is devoted to his own devotees, stayed for some time with his two great devotees, Shrutadeva and Bhaulashva, teaching them the behavior of perfect saints. Then the Lord returned to Dwaraka. In his narration of this pastime in Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, His Divine Grace, Sri Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada concludes, the instruction we receive from this incident is that King Bhaulashva and Shrutadeva, the Brahmana, are accepted by the Lord on the same level because both were pure devotees. We have to become pure devotees of Lord Krishna. Then only we can achieve more Bhakti Marga, and we're going to head towards our Mukti Marga. King Bhaulashva and Shrutadeva, the Brahmana Shrutadeva, were accepted by the Lord on the same level because both were pure devotees. This is the real qualification for being recognized by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because it has become the fashion of this age to become falsely proud of having taken birth in the family of a Kshatriya or a Brahmana. We see persons without any qualification claiming to be Brahmana or Kshatriya or Vaishya, but as it is stated in the scriptures, Kalu Shudra Sambhavaha. In this age of Kali, everyone is born as Shudra. This is because there is no performance of the purificatory process known as samskaras are not done. This is the tragedy of the Kali Yuga. This is because there is no performance of the purificatory process known as samskaras, which begin from the time of the mother's pregnancy and continue up to the point of the individual's death. No one can be classified as a member of a particular caste, especially of a higher caste Brahmana, Kshatriya, or Vaishya, simply by birthright. If one is not purified by the process of seed giving ceremony or Garbhadana Samskara, he is immediately classified among the Shudras, because only the Shudras do not undergo this purificatory process. Sex life without the purificatory process of Krishna consciousness is merely the seed giving process of the Shudras or the animals. But Krishna consciousness is the highest purification, highest perfection, by which everyone can come to the platform of Vaishnava. In Hindu Sanatana Dharma also, we got 16 samskaras. These samskaras are purification process. It has to be undergone by all Brahmana, Kshatriya, and Vaishya. All the three of them, three varnas, they have to purify it. And also they has to be followed. When Upanayana samskara is done, you are becoming Dvija. That means second born, second birth. You are the mother of, your second mother is Gayatri. Though you have to do Gayatri Upasana and Gayatri Sadhana. That's how your longevity and health, wealth, and prosperity all comes with Gayatri. Because Lord Krishna is in Gayatri. Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, among all the mantras, I am Gayatri. This includes having all the qualifications of Brahmana. The Vaishnavas are trying to become freed from the four kinds of sinful activities: illicit sex, indulgence in intoxicants, gambling, and eating animal foodstuffs. These are tamas gunas. The Vaishnavas, the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishyas are not supposed to do this. Illicit sex, indulgence in intoxicants, gambling, eating animal foodstuffs. All the food coming from the animal source should not be eaten at all. No one can be on the Brahmanical platform without having these preliminary qualifications. And without becoming a qualified Brahmana, one cannot become a pure devotee. So that's how the purification process of every human being is the best thing Krishna consciousness is bringing to all over the world. Thus, and the purports of the humble servants of His divine grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, to the 10th canto, 86th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Arjuna kidnaps Subhadra and blessed his devotees. 86th chapter completed. Iti Srimad Mahabhagavate Mahapurane Paramhamsam Samhitayam Dashamaskande Uttararde Shuta Devanugraho Rama Shadashitamo Dhyaya. Shadashitamo means 86th in Sanskrit. Shadashitamo Adhyaya, 86th chapter. Now, 87th chapter is very, very important in our Bhagavad Purana. The prayers of the personified Vedas. This chapter, 87th chapter, is Veda sthuthi. This chapter presents the prayers by the personified Vedas, glorifying the personal and impersonal aspect of Lord Narayana. Vishnu Sukta, Bhu Sukta, Sri Sukta, Purusha Sukta, all sorts of things are in Vedas. King Parikshit asked Srila Shukadeva Goswami how the Vedas can directly refer to the supreme absolute truth. Brahman, since the Vedas deal with the material realm governed by the three modes of nature, and Brahmana is completely transcendental to these modes. In reply, Shuka Maharshi described an ancient encounter between Sri Narayana Rishi and Narada Muni at Badrikashrama. Traveling to that sacred hermitage, Narada found the Lord surrounded by exalted residents of the nearby village Kalapa. Traveling to the sacred hermitage, Narada found the Lord surrounded by exalted residents of the nearby village of Kalapa. After bowing down to the Narayana Rishi and his associate, Narada submitted this same question to him. In reply, Narayana Rishi revealed an account of how this very question had been discussed long ago among the great sages living in Janaloka. Once these sages, feeling inquisitive about the nature of the absolute truth, chose Sanandana Kumar Sanandana Kumar to speak on the subject. Sanakanandana are four brothers. Sanandana is one of them. Sanandana told them how the numerous personified Vedas, appearing as the first emanations from the breathing of Lord Narayana, recited prayers for his glorification just before the creation. Sanandana then proceeded to recite these elaborate prayers. The residents of Janaloka were perfectly satisfied upon hearing Sanandana recite the prayers of the personified Vedas, which enlightened them about the true nature of the supreme absolute truth, and they honored Sanandana with their worship. Narada Muni was equally satisfied to hear this account from Sri Narayana Rishi. Thus Narada offered his obeisance to the Lord and then went to see his disciple Vedavyasa Maharshi, to whom he explained everything he had heard. So the 87th chapter starts with Raja Uvacha. Parikshit is asking the question. Brahman Brahmanya Nirdeshe Nirgune Gunavatrayah Katam Charati Shrutayah Sakshat Sadat Pate Sadat Pare Katam Charanti Shrutayah Sakshat Sadat Pare. This is the question of Parikshit Maharaja. O Brahmana, how can the Vedas directly describe the supreme absolute truth, who cannot be described in words? The Vedas are limited to describing the qualities of material nature, but the Supreme is devoid of these qualities, being transcendental to all material manifestation and their causes. Before beginning his commentary on this chapter, Srila Sridhara Swami prays, I worship Lord Narsimha, within whose mouth reside the great masters of the eloquence, upon whose chest resides the goddess of fortune, Mahalakshmi, and within whose heart resides the divine potency of consciousness. Desiring to purify my sampradaya and being bound by duty, I will briefly comment on the prayers of the personified Vedas to the best of my realization. Desiring to purify my sampradaya and being bound by duty, I will briefly comment on the prayers of the personified Vedas to the best of my realization. In as much as Srimad Bhagavatam has already been perfectly honored by my predecessor's explanation, I can only gather together the remnants of what they have honored. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti offers his own invocation. Mama Ratna Vaning Bhavam Ratneva Aparicintava Asantu Santo Jirname Jikremi Nasva Swanta Vinoda Krat. The saintly devotees may laugh at me for becoming a jewel merchant, though I know nothing about precious jewels, but I feel no shame, for at least I may entertain them. Though I have no wisdom, devotion, or detachment, I am still greedy to take the philosopher's stone of the Vedas, prayers from the fortress in which it is being kept. If the wind of indiscretion, my failure to acknowledge my lowly position threatens to knock me down, then while writing this commentary, I must hold on to the effulgent pillars of the feet of Sridhara Swami, Sanatana Goswami, and Lord Sri Krishna. Repeatedly bowing down to my divine spiritual master and to Lord Sri Krishna, the ocean of mercy, I take shelter of Sri Sukha Maharshi, the protector of the world and its universal eye. I take shelter of Sri Shukadeva Goswami, the protector of the world and its universal eye. At the end of the preceding chapter, Sukha Maharshi told Parikshit Maharaja, thus, O king, the personality of Godhead, who is the devotee of his own devotees, stayed for some time with his two great devotees, teaching them how perfect saints behave. Then he returned to Dwaraka. In this verse, the word Sanmargam can be understood in at least three ways. In the first, Sat is taken to mean devotee of the Supreme Lord, and thus Sanmargam means the path of Bhakti Yoga, devotional service. In the second, with Sat meaning a seeker of transcendental knowledge. Sanmargam means the philosophical path of knowledge, which has impersonal Brahman as its object. And in the third, with Sat referring to the transcendental sound of the Vedas. Sanmargam means the process of following Vedic injunctions. Both the second and the third of these interpretations of Sanmargam lead to the question of how the Vedas can describe the absolute truth. Srila Sridhara Swami elaborately analyzes this problem in terms of the traditional discipline of Sanskrit poetics. We should consider that words have three kinds of expressive capacities called sabdavritis. These are different ways of word refers to its meaning, distinguished as Mukhya Vritti, Lakshana Vritti, and Guna Vritti. Shabda Vritti, termed Mukhya, is the primary literal meaning of a word. This is also known as Abhidha, a word's denotation or dictionary meaning. Mukhya Vritti is further divided into two subcategories, namely Ruddhi and Yoga. A primary meaning is called Ruddhi when it is based on conventional usage, and Yoga when it is derived from another word's meaning by regular etymological rules. For example, the word go means cow is an example of Ruddhi, since its relation with its literal meaning is purely conventional. The denotation of the word Pachaka is chef, on the other hand, is a yoga vritti through the word's derivation from the root paka, by additional of the agent suffix ka. Beside its mukti vritti or primary meaning, a word can also be used in a secondary metaphorical sense. This usage is called lakshana. The rule is that a word should not be understood metaphorically if its mukhya vritti makes sense in the given context. Only after the mukhya vritti fails to convey a word's meaning may lakshana vritti be justifiably presumed. The function of lakshana is technically explained in the Kavya Shastra as an extended reference pointing to something in some way related to the object of the literal meaning. Thus, the phrase Gangyam, Gangavyam, Goshasha literally means the cowherd village in the Ganges. But that idea is absurd. So here, Ganagyam should rather be understood by its Lakshana to mean on the bank of the Ganges, the bank being something related to the river. Gaunavritti is a special kind of Lakshana, where the meaning is extended to some idea. Similarly, for example, in the statement of Simmo Devadattaha, Devadatta is a lion. Heroic Devadatta is metaphorically called lion because of his lion-like qualities. Simmo Devadattaha. Devadatta is a lion. Heroic Devadatta is metaphorically called a lion because of his lion-like qualities. In contrast, the example of the general kind of Lakshana, namely Gangyam Goshaha, involves a relationship not of similarly but of location. In this first verse of the 87th chapter, Parikshit Maharaja expresses doubt as to how the words of the Vedas can refer to the absolute truth by any of the valid kinds of Shabda Vritti. He asks, Khatam Sakshat Charanti. How can the Vedas directly describe Brahmana by Ruddha Mukhya Vritti, literal meaning based on convention? After all, the absolute is Anirdeshya, inaccessible to designation. And how can the Vedas even describe Brahmana by Gaunavritti, metaphor based on similar qualities? The Vedas are Guna Pratyayaha, full of qualitative descriptions, but Brahmana is Nirguna, without qualities. Obviously, metaphor based on similar qualities cannot apply the case of something that has no qualities. Furthermore, Parikshit Maharaja points out the Brahmana is a Sad Astaha Param, Sadastattaha Paramam, beyond all causes and effects, having no connection with any manifest existence, subtle or gross. The absolute cannot be expressed by either yoga vritti, a meaning derived etymologically, or lakshana metaphor, since both require some relationship of Brahmana to the other entities. Thus, King Parikshit is puzzled as to how the words of the Vedas can directly describe the absolute truth. Shuka Maharshi is answering to Parikshit Maharaj. Shuka continued, Supreme Lord manifested the material intelligence, senses, mind, and vital air of the living entities so that they could indulge their desires for sense gratification, take repeated births to engage in fruitive activities, become elevated in the future lives, and ultimately attain liberation. At the dawn of the creation, when the conditioned living entities lay dormant within the transcendental body of Lord Vishnu, he initiated the process of creation by sending forth the coverings of intelligence, mind, and so on for the living entities' benefit. As stated here, Vishnu is the independent Lord Prabhu, and the living entities are his jana, dependents. Thus, we should understand that Lord creates the cosmos entirely for the living entities' sake. Compassion is his own sole motive. By providing the living entities with gross and subtle bodies, the Supreme Lord enables them to pursue sense gratification and in the human form, religiosity, economic development, and liberation. In each body, the conditioned soul utilizes its senses for enjoyment, and when he comes to the human form, he must also discharge various duties assigned to him at the different stages of his life. If he faithfully discharges his duties, he earns more refined and extensive enjoyment in the future. If not, he is degraded. And when the soul eventually hankers to be freed from material life, the path of liberation is always available. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti comments that in this verse, the repeated use of the word cha indicates the importance of all of what Lord provides, not only the path of liberation, but also the paths of gradual elevation through religious life and appropriate sense enjoyment. In all their endeavors, the living entities depend on the Lord's mercy for success. In all their endeavors, the living entities depend on the Lord's mercy for success. Without intelligence, senses, and mind and vital air, the living entities cannot achieve anything, neither elevation to heaven, purification through knowledge, purification of the eightfold meditational yoga. Ashtanga yoga, it is called. Eightfold meditational yoga is called Ashtanga yoga, nor pure devotion through following the process of bhakti yoga, beginning with hearing and chanting the names of the God. How then, if the Supreme arranges all these facilities for the conditioned soul's welfare, can he be impersonal? Far from presenting the absolute truth as ultimately impersonal, the Upanishads speak at great length about his personal qualities. The absolute described by the Upanishads is free from all inferior material qualities, and yet he is omniscient, omnipotent, the master and controller of all, the universally worshipable Lord. He who awards the results of everyone's work and the reservoir of all eternity knowledge and bliss. Mandukya Upanishad states, Ya sarva jnana sarva jna sa sarva id yasya jnana mayam tapaha. He who is all knowing, from whom the potency of all knowledge comes, he is the wisest of all. In the words of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Sarvasya Vasi, Sarvasya Sneha, Sarvasyenaha. He is the Lord and controller of everyone. Ya Prithviyam Tishtem Prithviya Antaraha. He who resides within the earth pervades it, and so Kamyata Bahu Shyam. He desired, I will become many. Similarly, the Aitreya Upanishad states, Sa Aiksha Tata Teja Sratana. He glanced at his potency, who then manifested the creation. While the Taittiriya Upanishad, second chapter, first sloka, declares, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. Supreme is unlimited truth and knowledge. The phrase Tat Tvam Asi, you are that, Chandogya Upanishad, is often cited by impersonalists as a confirmation of the absolute identity of the finite Jiva soul with his creator. Shankaracharya and his followers elevate these words to the status of one of the few Mahavakyas. Key phrases they say, express the essential purport of Vedanta. The leading thinkers of the standard Vaishnava schools of Vedanta, however, vociferously disagree with this interpretation. Acharyas Ramanuja, Madhvacharya, Baladevacharya, Vidyabhushanacharya, and others have offered numerous alternative explanations according to systematic study of the Upanishads and other Shrutis. The question Maharaja Parikshit was submitted here, namely, how can the Vedas directly refer to the absolute truth, has been answered as follows by Shukadeva Mahaswami. The Lord created the intelligence and other elements for the sake of conditioned living beings. The Lord created intelligence and other elements for the sake of conditioned living beings. A skeptic may object that this answer is irrelevant, but Shuka Maharshi answer is not actually irrelevant. As Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti explains, answers to subtle questions must often be phrased indirectly, as Lord Krishna himself states in his instructions to Uddhava. Parokshavada rasaya paroksham mama cha priyam. The Vedic seers and mantras deal in esoteric terms, and I also am pleased by such confidential descriptions. In the present context, the impersonalist on whose behalf Parikshit Maharaja asked his question cannot appreciate the direct answer. So instead, Srila Shukadeva Goswami gives an indirect reply. You say that Brahman is indescribable by words, but if the Supreme Lord had not created the intelligence, mind, and senses, then sound and the other objects of perception would all be just as indescribable as a Brahman. Brahman, you would have been blind and deaf since birth and would know nothing about the physical forms and sounds. What to speak of the absolute? So just as the merciful Lord has given us all faculties of perception for experiencing and describing to others the sensations of sight, sound, and so forth, in the same way, he may give someone the receptive capacity to realize Brahman. He may, if he chooses, create some extraordinary way of words to function apart from their ordinary references to the material substances, qualities, categories, and actions that will enable them to express the supreme truth. He is, after all, the Almighty Lord, Prabhu, and he can easily make the indescribable describable. He can make the indescribable to describable. Lord Matsya assures King Satyavrata that absolute truth can be known from the words of the Vedas. You will be thoroughly advised and favored by me, and because of your inquiries, everything about my glories, which are known as Parabrahmam, Parama-Brahm, will be manifest within your heart. Thus you will know everything about me. The fortunate soul who has been graced by the Supreme Lord with divine inquisitiveness will ask questions about the nature of absolute, and by hearing the answers given by great sages which are recorded in the Vedic literatures, he will come to understand the Lord as he is. Thus, only by the special mercy of the Supreme Person does Brahman become Sabditham, literally denoted by words. Otherwise, without the Lord's exceptional grace, the words of the Vedas cannot reveal the absolute truth. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti suggests that the word buddhi in this verse, spoken by Shukadeva Goswami, can indicate the Mahatattva from which evolve the various expansions of ether, such as sound, which are designated here as Indriya, Maratham, then means for the sake of using transcendental sound to describe Brahman, since for that precise purpose the Supreme Lord inspired Prakriti to evolve ether and sound. A further understanding of the purpose of creation is spoken by the words Bhavartham and Atmane Kalpanyaya. If there is reading Kalpanyaya, Bhavartham and Atmane Kalpanaya. If the reading Kalpanaya instead of Akalpanaya is taken, Bhavartham means for the good of the living entities. Worship is Kalapanam of the Supreme Self, Atmane, is the means by which the living entities can fulfill the divine purpose for which they exist. Intelligence, mind, and senses are meant to be used for worshipping the Supreme Lord, whether or not the living entity has yet brought them to the stage of transcendental purification. How both purified and unpurified devotees use their intelligence, mind, and senses in worshipping the Lord is described in reference to the following quote from the Gopala Tapani Upanishad. The Supreme Lord, appearing in his two-armed form, had divine lotus eyes, a complexion of the color of a cloud, and garments that resembled lightning. He wore garland of forest flowers, and his beauty was enhanced by his pose of meditative silence. The transcendental intelligence and senses of the Lord's perfect devotees correctly perceive his purely spiritual beauty, and their realizations are echoed in Gopala Tapanishrutis. Comparison of Lord Krishna's eyes, body, and clothing to a lotus, a cloud, and lightning. On the other hand, devotees on the level of sadhana who are in the process of becoming purified have only barely realized the Supreme Lord's boundless spiritual beauty. Nonetheless, by hearing scriptural passages such as this one from the Gopala Tapani Upanishad, they engage in contemplating him to the best of their fledgling ability. Although the neophyte devotees have not yet learned how to fully realize the Lord or meditate steadily on even the effulgence surrounding his body, still they take pleasure in presuming we are the meditating on our Lord, and the Supreme Lord, moved by the waves of his boundless mercy, himself thinks, these devotees are meditating on me. When their devotion matures, he draws them to his feet to engage in his intimate service. Thus, it is concluded that the Vedas have access to the personal identity of the Supreme only by his mercy. Those who came before even our ancient predecessors meditate upon this same confidential knowledge of the absolute truth. Indeed, anyone who faithfully concentrates on this knowledge will become free from material attachments and attain the final goal of life. This confidential knowledge concerning the absolute truth should not be doubted, since it has been passed down through authoritative lines of learned sages from time immemorial. One who cultivates the science of the Supreme with reverence, avoiding the distractions of fruitive rituals and mental speculation, will learn to give up the false designations of material body and mundane society, and thus he will become eligible for perfection. In the opinion of Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti, the first two verses of this chapter can be considered an Upanishad on the topic of Brahman. Shukadeva Goswami here disclaims authorship on the grounds that this Upanishad was spoken previously by Narada Muni, who himself heard it from Sanat Kumar. अत्र ते वर्णयिष्यामि गातां नारायणान्वितां नारदस्य च संवादा मृष्टेन नारायणस्य च संवादमृषेन नारायणस्य च. In this connection, I will relate to you a narration concerning the Supreme Lord Narayana. It is absolute conversation that once occurred between Sri Narayana Rishi and Narada Muni. Lord Narayana is connected in two ways with the following narration, as its speaker and as the subject it describes. Ekada narado lokan paryatan bhagavad priyaha sanatanam rim drishtum yo narayana. Once, while traveling among the various planets of the universe, the Lord's beloved devotee Narada went to visit the primeval sage Narayana at his ashrama. Yo vai bharatavarshe'smin kshamaaya swastraye nrunam dharmajnana shamo teta ma kalpadastitastapaha. From the very beginning of Brahma's day, Lord Narayana Rishi has been undergoing asteric penances in this land of Bharata while perfectly performing religious duties and exemplifying spiritual knowledge and self-control, all for the benefit of human beings in both this world and the next world. Tatropavishtavishtavihi, tatropavistum rishavihi, kalapagramavasivihi, paritam pranato prachadidimeva kurudvaha. There Narada approached Narayana Rishi, who was sitting amidst the sages of the villages of Kalapa. After bowing down to the Lord, O hero of the Kurus, Narada asked him the very same question you have asked me today. Tasmai hevo chat Bhagavan Rishinam Shunatpamidam Yo Brahma-Bhutah Purvesham Janaloka Nivasinam. As the sages listened, Lord Narayana Rishi related to Narada an ancient discussion about the absolute truth that took place among the residents of Janaloka. Now, Bhagavan Narayana Rishi is telling Sri Bhagavanu Acha Swayambhuva Brahmasatram Janaloke Bhuvatpara Tatrasthana Manasana Muninamodvaretasam. O son of self-born Brahma, once long ago on Janaloka, wise sages who resided there performed a great sacrifice to the absolute truth by vibrating transcendental sounds. These sages, mental sons of Brahma, were all perfect celibates. Srila Sridhara Swami explains that the word Satram here refers to a Vedic sacrifice in which all the participants are equally qualified to serve as priests. In this instance, each of the sages present in Janaloka could speak equally well on the topic of Brahman. Shvetadipam Gatavati Tvayi Drushtam Tadishwaram Brahmavadaha Susamvrattaha Shrutayo Yatra Sherate Tatraha Yamabhut Prashastvam Ma Yamuna Pruchasi. O son of self-born Brahma, once long ago in Janaloka, wise sages who resided there performed a great sacrifice to the absolute truth by vibrating transcendental sounds. These sages, mental sons of Brahma, were all perfect celibates. Srila Sridhara Swami explains that the word Satram here refers to a Vedic sacrifice in which all the participants are equally qualified to serve as priests. In this instance, each of the sages present in Janaloka could speak equally well on the topic of Brahman. At that time, you happened to be visiting the Lord on Shvetadvipa, that Supreme Lord in whom the Vedas lie down to rest during the period of universal annihilation. A lively discussion arose among the sages on Janaloka as to the nature of the Supreme Absolute Truth. Indeed, the same question arose then that you are asking me now. Parikshit asked the same question what Narada asked some time ago. Shloka number 11, Tulya Shutatapala Shutatapaha Shilas Tulya Striyari Dvodhyama Api Chakruhu Pravachanamekam Shashrushavo Pare. Although these sages were all equally qualified in terms of Vedic study and austerity, and although they all saw friends, enemies, and neutral parties equally, they chose one of their number to be the speaker, and the rest became eager listeners. Sanandana Uvacha. Among Sanaka Sanandana, Sanandana is Uvacha. Sanandana is telling, Swasrishtamidamapiyam Shayanam Sahashaktivihi Tadante Bodayan Chukralige Sudayam Param. Sanandana is telling, Yata Shayanam Samrajyam Vandinaspratarakrame Pratyosho Bhetya Sushoklo Bodayante no Jivanaha Bodayantyo no Jivanaha. Sri Sanandana replied, after Supreme Lord withdrew the universe he had previously created, he lay for some time as if asleep, and all his energies rested dormant within him. When the time came for the next creation, the personified Vedas awakened him by chanting his glories, just as the poet serving king approached him at dawn and awakened him by reciting his heroic deeds. At the time of creation, the Vedas are first emanation from the breathing of Lord Mahavishnu, and in personified form, they serve him by waking him from his mystic sleep. This statement made by Sanandana implies that Sanaka and other sages had asked him the same question that Narada had asked Narayana Rishi and Maharaja Parikshit had asked Sukadeva Goswami. Sanandana refers the questions back to the example of personified Vedas themselves in their address to Lord Mahavishnu. Even though the Vedas knew that the Lord, being omniscient, does not need to be informed of his glories, they enthusiastically took this opportunity to praise him. Shrutaya Uchu Jaya Jaya Jakya Jaya 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 Jakya Jamajita Dosha Grubita Gunam Tomasi Yadatmanam Samavaradda Samastabagam Aga Jaga Doka Samukila Shakta Vabodakate Kachida Jayatmanacha Charitorur Chure Nignamaha Brahuda Palababdhamema Tadaventavesha Vishataya Yata Udayastamayo Yukrute Madi Mavikrat. The Shruti said, victory, victory to you, O unquarrelable, unconquerable one. By your very nature, you are perfectly full in all opulences. Therefore, please defeat the eternal power of illusion, who assumes control over the modes of nature to create difficulties for conditioned souls. O you who awaken all the energies of the moving and unmoving embodied beings, sometimes the Vedas can recognize you as you sport with your material and spiritual potencies. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, the 28 verses of the prayers of the personified Vedas from text 14 to 41 represent the opinions of each of the 28 major Shrutis. These chief Upanishads and other Shrutis concern themselves with various approaches to the absolute truth, and among them, those Shrutis are supreme which emphasize pure, unalloyed devotional services to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Upanishads direct our attention to the Personality of Godhead by first negating what is distinct from him and then defining some of his important characteristics. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti interprets the first words of this prayer, Jaya Jaya, to mean, please reveal your super excellency. The word Jaya is repeated out of either reverence or joy. How should I reveal my excellency? The Lord might ask. The Shrutis answer by requesting him to mercifully destroy the ignorance of all living beings and attract them to his lotus feet. The Lord says, but Maya, who imposes ignorance on the jivas, is full of good qualities. Grahabhiti gunam. The Lord says, but Maya, who imposes ignorance on the jivas, is full of good qualities. Grabhiti gunam. Why should I oppose her? Yes, the Vedas answer, but she has taken on the three modes of nature to bewilder the conditioned souls and make them falsely identify with their material bodies. Her modes of goodness, passion, ignorance, moreover, are tainted. Dosha gribhiti, because you are not manifest in their presence. The Shrutis go on to address the Lord as Ajita. The Shrutis go on to address the Lord as Ajita, implying that only you cannot be conquered by Maya, whereas others, like Brahma, are defeated by their own faults. The Lord responds, but what proof do you have that she cannot conquer me? The proof lies in the fact that in your original state, you have already realized the perfection of all opulences. At this point, the Lord might object that merely destroying the ignorance of the jivas will not suffice to bring them to his lotus feet, since the jiva, soul, even after his ignorance is dispelled, cannot attain the Lord without engaging in devotional service. As the Lord states in his own words, Bhaktyayam ekaya gruhyaya. I am attainable only through devotional service. To this objection, the Shrutis reply, my Lord, O you who awaken all energies after creating the intelligence and senses of the living entities, you inspire them to work hard and enjoy the fruits of their labor. In addition, by your mercy, you awaken their ability to pursue the progressive paths of knowledge, mystic yoga, and devotional service, allowing them to advance toward you in your aspects of Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, respectively. And when Jnana, Yoga, and Bhakti mature, you empower the living beings to directly realize you in each of your three aspects: Jnana, Yoga, and Bhakti. This has to mature. You empower the living beings to directly realize you in each of your three aspects. If the Lord were to ask for authoritative evidence to support this statement by the personified Vedas, they humbly reply, we ourselves are the evidence. On some occasions, such as now, the time of creation, you consort with your external Maya potency, whereas you are always present with your internal energy. Maya potency, whereas you are always present with your internal energy. It is at times such as present, when your activity is outwardly manifest, that we, the Vedas, can recognize you in your play. Thus, endowed with authority by their personal association with the Supreme Lord, the Shrutis promulgate the process of karma, jnana, and yoga, and bhakti as various means for the conditioned souls to employ their intelligence, senses, mind, and vitality in search of the absolute truth. In many places, the Vedas glorify the transcendental personal qualities of the Supreme. The following verse appears in the Shvetashvara Upanishad, the Gopalatapani Upanishad, and the Brahma Upanishad. Eko deva sarva bhuteshu udaha sarva vyapi sarva bhutan natatmaha karmadyaksha sarva bhutadi vasaha sakshi chetaha kevalo nirgunachaha. The one Supreme Lord lives hidden inside all created things. He pervades all matter and sits within the hearts of all living beings as the indwelling supersoul. He supervises their material activities. Thus, while having no material qualities himself, he is the unequal witness and giver of consciousness. The Supreme's personal qualities are further described in the following quotation from the Upanishads. Ya sarvajna, ya sa sarvavidya, vyasa jnana mayam tapaha. He who is all-knowing, from whom the potency of all knowledge comes. He is the wisest of all. Mundoka Upanishad says, the Lord's role in creation is mentioned in many statements of the Shruti. The Brahma Aranyaka Upanishad states, so kamyata bahushayam, bahusham. He desired, I will become many. The phrase so kamyata, he desired, here is implies that Lord's personality is eternal. For even prior to the creation of the absolute truth, experienced desire, and desire is an attribute unequal to persons. Absolute truth experienced desires, and desire is an attribute unequal to persons. Aitareya Upanishad similarly states, Sa aikshata tata tejo sutataha. He saw and his power sent forth creation. Here the word tat tejaha refers to the Lord's partial expansions. Mahavishnu, who glances upon Maya and thus manifests the material creation, or tat tejaha, may refer to the Lord's impersonal Brahman feature, his potency of all-pervasive eternal existence, as described in Sri Brahma Samhita. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is endowed with great power. The glowing effulgency of his transcendental form is the impersonal Brahman, which is absolute, complete, and unlimited, and which displays the varieties of countless planets, with their different opulences in millions and millions of universes. In summing up this verse, Srila Sridhara Swami prays All glories to you, O conquerable one. Please defeat the influence of your eternal Maya, who covers all moving and non-moving creatures, and who rules over the modes of illusion. Without your influence, all these Vedic mantras would be powerless to sing of you as the ocean of transcendental qualities. बृहदुपलब्धमेतरन्तवेशपतया यत उदयास्तमायो विश्वतेर्मध्ये वा विकृतात् अत ऋषयो दुदुस्तयो मनोवचनाचारितं कथमयता भुवन्ति भुवि दत्तपुरान् पदानि नृणाम्. This perceivable world is identified with Supreme because the Supreme Brahman is the ultimate foundation of all existence, remaining unchanged as all created things are generated from it and at last dissolved onto it. Just as clay remains unchanged by the products made from clay, it again and again merged with the soil. Again, the same term is soil. Thus, it is toward you alone that the Vedic sages direct all their thoughts, words, and acts. After all, how can the footsteps of men fail to touch the earth on which they live? After all, how can the footsteps of men fail to touch the earth on which they live? There may be some doubt as to whether Vedic mantras are unanimous when identifying the Supreme Personality of Godhead. After all, some mantras state Indro Yata, which is Chasya Rajaha. Indra is the king of all moving and non-moving beings, while others say Agnir Murda Divaha, Agni is the chief of the heavens. And at other mantras point to different deities as absolute. It would seem then that Vedas present a polytheistic world view. Answering this doubt, the Vedas themselves explain in this verse that there can be only one source of universal creation called Brahman or Brahat, the greatest, which is the singular truth underlying and pervading all existence. No finite deity like Indra or Agni can fulfill this unequal role, nor would the Shrutis to be so ignorant as to propose such an idea. As indicated here by the word Tvai, Lord Vishnu alone is the absolute truth. Indra and the other gods may be glorified in various ways, but they possess only those powers Lord Sri Vishnu has granted them. The Vedic sages understand that this entire world, including Indra, Agni, and everything else, perceivable by the eyes, ears, and other senses, is identical with the one supreme truth, the personality of Godhead, who is called Brahat, the greatest, because he is Avaseshu, the ultimate substance that remains. From the Lord, everything expands at creation, and into him everything dissolves at annihilation. He exists before and after the material manifestation as the constant basis known to philosophers as the ingredient cause, upadana. Despite the fact that countless manifestations emanate from him, the Supreme Lord exists eternally unchanged, an idea the Shrutis specifically emphasize here with the word avikritat. The words mrudiva, as in the case of clay, allude to famous analogy spoken to Udalaka to his son Shvetaketu in the Chandogya Upanishad. The objects of the material world exist merely as names, transformations defined by language, whereas the ingredient cause, like the clay from which parts are made, is the actual reality. A mass of clay is the ingredient cause of various parts, statues, and so on. But the clay itself remains in its essence unchanged. Eventually, the parts and other objects will be destroyed and returned to the clay from which they came. Similarly, Supreme Lord is the total ingredient cause, and he remains eternally untouched by transformation. This is the purport of the statement Sarvam Kalva Idam Brahma. Everything is Brahman. Chandogya Upanishad. Wondering at this mystery, the great devotee Gajendra prayed. Namo namaste akila karanaya niskaranaya abhota karanaya. Obeisance is again and again to you, the source of all creation. You are the inconceivable cause of all causes, and you there is no and of you there is no other cause. Prakriti, material nature, is often considered the ingredient cause of the creation. In Western science as well as in the Vedas, this does not contradict the higher fact of the Supreme Lord's being the final cause, since Prakriti is his energy and is herself subject to change. Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Krishna says in the 11th chapter, the material universe is real, having Prakriti as its original ingredient and final state. Lord Mahavishnu is the resting place of nature, which becomes manifest by the power of time. Thus, nature, the Almighty Vishnu, and time are not different from me, the Supreme Absolute Truth. Prakriti, however, undergoes transformation, while our Lord, Supreme Purusha, does not. Prakriti is the personality of Godhead's external energy, but he has another energy, his internal energy, which is Swarupa Bhuta, non-different from his very essence. The Lord's internal energy, like himself, is never subject to material change. Therefore, the mantras of the Vedas, along with the rishis who have received these mantras in meditation and transmitted them for the benefit of mankind, direct their attention primarily toward the personality of Godhead. The Vedic sages direct the activities of their mind and words, that is to say, the inner as well as the literal meaning, avidavritti, of their utterances, first of all toward him, and only secondarily toward separated transformations of Prakriti, such as Indra and other gods. Just as man's footsteps, whether placed on mud, stone, or brick, cannot fail to touch the surface of the earth. So, whatever the Vedas discuss within the realm of material generation, they relate to the absolute truth. Mundane literature describes limited phenomena, disregarding the relation of its objects to the total reality. But the Vedas always focus their perfect vision on the Supreme. As the Chandogya Upanishad affirms in its statements, Mritiketu eva satyam and sarvam kalva idam sarvam kalva idam brahma. Reality is understood properly when everything is seen to be dependent on Brahman, the absolute for its existence. Brahman alone is real, not because of nothing we see in this world is real, but because of Brahman is the absolute final cause of everything. Thus, the word satyam, as used in the phrase Mrittiketi eva satyam, has been defined in another context as ingredient cause by no less an authority than Lord Krishna himself. A material object itself composed of an essential ingredient. A material object itself composed of an essential ingredient creates another material object through transformation. In this way, one created object becomes the cause and basis of another created object. A particular thing may be called real in that it possesses the basic nature of another object that constitutes its cause and original cause. Explaining the word Brahman, Srila Prabhupada writes in Krishna, the Supreme Person of Godhead, the word Brahman indicates the greatest of all and the maintainer of everything. The impersonalists are attracted by the greatness of the sky, but because of their poor fund of knowledge, they are not attracted by the greatness of the Krishna. In our practical life, however, we are attracted by the greatness of a person and not by greatness of a big mountain. Actually, the term Brahman actually applies to Lord Krishna only. Therefore, in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna admitted that Lord Krishna is the Parabrahman, or the supreme rest of everything. Krishna is the supreme Brahman because of his unlimited knowledge, unlimited potencies, unlimited strength, unlimited influence, unlimited beauty, and unlimited renunciation. Therefore, the word Brahman can be applied to Krishna only. Arjuna affirms that because the impersonal Brahman is the effulgence emanating as rays of Krishna's transcendental body, Krishna is the Parabrahman. Everything is resting on Brahman, but Brahman itself is resting on Krishna. Therefore, Krishna is the ultimate Brahman or Parabrahman. The material elements are accepted as inferior energies of Krishna because by their interaction, the cosmic manifestation takes place, rests on Krishna, and after dissolution, again enters into the body of Krishna as his subtle energy. Krishna is therefore the cause of both manifestation and dissolution. In summary, Sridhara Swami prays the gods headed by Shiva, Agni, Surya, and Indra, and indeed all beings in the universe, do not come into existence of independently of you. The mantras of the Vedas, though they speak from various viewpoints, all speak about you, the unborn Lord, appearing in numerous forms. Iti tamasurayastatipate kila lokakamala क्षपण कथामृताब्धि मम गव्य तपांसि जुहु किमतपुन स्वदाम विदुता श्रेय काल गुणाः परम भञ्जन्ति ये पदमजस्रुकानुभवन्. These shlokas explanations are not easy to understand. They are very difficult. You have to read again and again to come to proper understanding sometimes. Therefore, O master of these three worlds, the wise get rid of all misery by diving deep into the nectarian ocean of topics about you, which washes away all the contamination of the universe. Then what to speak of those who, having by spiritual strength rid their minds of bad habits and freed themselves from time, are able to worship your true nature, O Supreme One, finding within it uninterrupted bliss. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, in the previous verse, those Shrutis whose presentation of the supreme truth may seem impersonal clarified their true purpose. Now, in the present verse, those who focus exclusively on the divine personality of Godhead, who speak of his transcendental pastimes, take their turn in praising him, because all the Vedas declare the supremacy of the personality of Godhead as the cause of all causes. Discriminating persons should take to his worship. By diving into the ocean of his glories, intelligent devotees help dispel the distress of all souls and loosen their own burning attachment to materialistic life. These advancing devotees gradually give up all material attachment and lose any interest they once had in the troublesome austerities of karma, jnana, and yoga. Beyond these devotees are the Shrutis. Beyond these devotees are the Shuris, connoisseurs of spiritual truth, who honor the nectarian ocean of the Supreme Lord's glories by immersing themselves fully within it. These mature devotees of the Supreme Lord achieve unimaginable perfection. The Lord, reciprocating their sincere endeavors, empowers them to realize him in his personal form, remembering with rapture of the Lord's intimate pastimes and entourage. They are automatically freed from the lost subtle traces of mental contamination and from sensitivity to the unavoidable pains of disease and old age. Referring to the purifying power of devotional service, the Shruti says, Tadyata puskara palasa apona shilasyante evam vidi papam karma nasushyate. Just as water does not adhere to a lotus leaf, so sinful activities do not adhere to one who knows the truth in this way. The Satpatha Brahmana, Taittiriya Brahmana, Brahadaranика Upanishad, and Bodhayana Dharma Shastra all concur. Na karmana dipyate papakena. One thus avoids becoming tainted by sinful activity. Sinful activity. Rigveda refers to the Supreme Lord's pastime as follows. Vishturna kamya varahana pravacham. Only he may fully enunciate the heroic deeds of Lord Vishnu, who can count all the particles of dust in the world. Many Shruti mantras glorify devotion service to the Lord, such as Eko vasi sarvago ye nabujananti dhirasaha Tesam Sukam Shashvatam Netaresam. He is the only omnipresent Lord and controller. Only those wise souls who worship him obtain eternal happiness, not anyone else. In this connection, Srila Sridhara Swami prays Sakala Veda Chanarita Sadgunas. Because all the Vedas describe your transcendental qualities, all thoughtful persons are attracted to hearing and chanting about your all auspicious qualities. Thus, by remembering your lotus feet, they are freed from material distress. Now we are coming to the 17th sloka. Dutayava swasantya sabruto yaditenu vidha mahadamamadayo mandasrujan yadunagrahataha purushavidonmayatra charamon mayadishu ya satasatam param tomatam yadveshta yadeshvesha sheshamrutam. Only if they become your faithful followers are those who breathe actually alive. Otherwise, their breathing is like that of a bellows. It is by your mercy alone that elements beginning with the Mahat Tattva and false ego created the egg of this universe. Among the manifestations known as Annamaya, Kosha, and so forth, you are the ultimate one, entering within the material coverings along with the living entity and assuming the same forms as those he takes. Distinct from the gross and subtle material manifestation, you are the reality underlying them all. Life is without purpose for one who remains ignorant of his most well-wishing benefactor and thus fails to worship him. Such a person's breathing is no better than breathing of the blacksmith's bellows. The gift of human life is a fortunate opportunity for the conditioned soul, but by turning away from this Lord, from his Lord, the living being commits spiritual suicide. Among all the eternal conscious beings, there is one who supplies the needs of everyone else. The wise souls who worship him in his abode attain everlasting peace. Others cannot. So Bhakti Marga is one of these points every devotee should understand. Among all the eternal conscious beings, there is one who supplies the needs of everyone else. The wise souls who worship him in his abode attain everlasting peace. Others cannot. The wise souls who worship him in his abode attain everlasting peace. Others cannot. What is alive, what is dead? The bodies and minds of materialistic non-devotees seem to display the symptoms of life, but this appearance is deceptive. Actually, the conditioned soul has little control over his own bodily existence. Against his will, he was to excrete, waste, get sick from time to time, and eventually age and die. And in this mind, he unwillingly suffers anger, hankering, and lamentation. Lord Krishna described this situation as Yantrarudina Maya. Riding helplessly as a passenger in a mechanical vehicle, the soul undoubtedly is alive, and irrevocably so. But in his ignorance, that inner life is covered and forgotten in its place. The automation of the external mind and body carries out the dictates of the modes of nature, which force one to act in a way altogether irrelevant to the dormant needs of the soul. Calling out to the forgetful prisoners of illusion, the Shvetastra Upanishad urges, all you sons of immortality here, you who once resided in the divine kingdom. So, on the one hand, what is normally viewed as living, the material body is in actually a dead machine being manipulated by the modes of nature. And on the other hand, what the materialistic condescendingly views as inert matter meant for exploitation is in its unknown essence connected with a living intelligence vastly more potent than his own. The Vedic civilization recognizes the intelligence behind nature as belonging to the gods who preside over the various elements and ultimately to the Supreme Lord Himself. Matter, after all, cannot act coherently without the impulse and guidance of a living force. As Krishna states in Bhagavad Gita, 9th chapter, 10th sloka, this material nature, which is one of my energies, is working under my direction. O son of Kunti, producing all moving and non-moving beings under its rule. This manifestation is created, annihilated again and again. In the beginning of creation, Lord Mahavishnu glanced at the dormant material nature, Prakriti, thus awakened. The subtle Prakriti began to evolve into more concrete forms. First the Mahat, then false ego in conjunction with each Prakriti's three modes, and gradually the various material elements, including intelligence, mind, the senses, and the five physical elements, with their presiding gods. Even after becoming separately manifested, however, the deities responsible for the various elements could not work together to produce the perceptible world until Lord Vishnu, by his special mercy, once more intervened. This is described in the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Etadeva kala Vishnu. The controlling deities of these physical elements are empowered expansions of Lord Vishnu. They are embodied by the eternal time under the external energy, and they are his parts and parcels. Because they were entrusted with different functions of universal duties and were unable to perform them, they offered fascinating prayers to the Lord. The gods said, O Lord, your lotus feet are like an umbrella for the surrounded souls, protecting them from all the miseries of material existence. All the sages under that shelter throw off all material miseries. We therefore offer our respectable obeisances onto your lotus feet. Hearing the prayers of the assembled gods of the elements, the Supreme Lord then showed his favor. The Lord thus heard about the suspension of progressive creative functions of the universe due to the non-combination of his potencies, such as the Mahatattva. The Supreme Powerful Lord then simultaneously entered into the 23 elements with the goddess Kali. The Supreme Powerful Lord then simultaneously entered into the 23 elements with the goddess Kali, his external energy, who alone amalgamates all the different elements. Thus, then, Personality of Godhead entered into the elements by his energy. All the living entities were enlaved into different activities, just as one is engaged in his work after awakening from sleep. In Krishna, Srila Prabhupada explains the 5 levels of ego covering the self within the body. There are 5 different departments of existence known as Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and at last Anandamaya Kosha. These are enumerated in the Brahmananda Valley of the Taittiriya Upanishad. In the beginning of life, every living entity is a food conscious. A child or an animal is satisfied only by getting nice food. This stage of consciousness, in which the goal is to eat sumptuously, is called Annamaya. Anna means food, Anna means food, Annamaya. After this, one lives in the consciousness of being alive. If one can continue his life without being attacked or destroyed, one thinks himself happy. This stage is called Pranamaya, or conscious of one's existence. After this stage, when one is situated on the mental platform, that consciousness is called Manomaya. Material civilization is primarily situated in these 3 stages: Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha. The first concern of civilized persons is economic development. The next concern is a defense against being annihilated. And the next consciousness is mental speculation, the philosophical approach to the values of life. If by the evolutionary process of philosophical life one happens to reach to the form of intellectual life and understands that he is not this material body, but is a spirit soul, one is situated in the Vijnanamaya stage. Then by evolution of spiritual life, he comes to understand the Supreme Lord or the Supreme Soul. When one develops his relationship with him and executes devotional service. That stage of life is called Krishna Consciousness, the Anandamaya stage. Anandamaya is the blissful life of knowledge and eternity. As it is said in Vedanta Sutra, Anandamaya, Vyasat, Supreme Brahman and the subordinate Brahman, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entities, are both joyful by nature. As long as the living entities are situated in the lower four stages of life, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, they are considered to be in the material condition of life. But as soon as one reaches the stage of Anandamaya Kosha, he becomes a liberated soul. This Anandamaya stage is explained in the Bhagavad Gita as the Brahma-Bhutah Stage. There it is said that in the Brahma-Bhutah stage of life, there is no anxiety and no hankering. This stage begins when one becomes equally disposed toward all living entities, and it then expands to the stage of Krishna Consciousness, in which one hankers to render service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This hankering for advancement in devotion service is not the same as hankering for sense gratification in material existence. In other words, hankering remains in the spiritual life, but it becomes purified. When our senses are purified, they become freed from all material stages, namely Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, and Vijnanamaya, and they become situated in the highest stage, Anandamaya, a blissful life in Krishna consciousness. Mayavadi philosophers consider Anandamaya to be the state of being merged in the Supreme. To them, Anandamaya means that blissful soul and the individual soul become one. But the real fact is that oneness does not mean merging into the Supreme and losing one's own individual existence. Merging into the spiritual existence is the living entity's realization of qualitative oneness with the Supreme Lord in his eternity and knowledge aspects. But the actual Anandamaya stage is obtained when one is engaged in devotional service. That is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Madhavaktim lavate param. The Brahma-Bhutah Anandamaya stage is complete only when there is an exchange of love between the Supreme and the subordinate living entities. Unless one comes to this Anandamaya stage of life, his breathing is like the breathing of a bellows in a blacksmith shop. His duration of life is like that of a tree, and he is no better than the lower animals like the camels, hogs, or dogs. In accompanying the jiva within the coverings of Maya, Paramatma is not bound by karmic entanglement as the jiva is. Rather, the Supreme Soul's connection with these coverings is like the apparent connection between the moon and some tree's branches it is seen through. Super Soul, Sadasasta Param, Sada Asattaha Param, always transcendental to the subtle and gross manifestations of Annamaya and so on. Although he enters among them as the sanctioning agnes of all the activities as their final cause, the Super Soul is in one sense identical with the manifest products of creation. But in his original identity, Swarupa, he remains distinct. In this second sense, he is the Anandamaya alone, the last of the five koshas. Therefore, the Shrutis address him here as Avashesham, the residual essence. This is also expressed in the text of the Taittiriya Upanishad, Rasovai Saha. Within this personal essence, the Supreme Lord enjoys rasa, the reciprocation of the mellows of devotional service, and integral to the play of rasas is the participation of realized jivas. Rasovai Saha, Rasam Hai Evam Labdavanadi Bhavati. He is the embodiment of rasa and jiva. Who realizes this rasa becomes fully ecstatic, or in the words of personalized Vedas, praying in this universe. Praying this verse, Super Soul is rasam. Super Soul is rasam, where Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti interprets as here meaning realized by great sages. In the opinion of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, the last word of all authoritative scripture, Sarvanatim Shruti, Sarvantiva Shruti, is contained in the aforesaid Rasavai Saha, which is demonstrably a reference to Lord Sri Krishna as the infinitely expanding embodiment of divine pleasure. Sarva Brahma, Sarva Brahatmananda, the Gopala Tapani Shruti states, Yo Sau Jagat Swapna Susupritim Atiya Turitaha Gopalaha. Lord Krishna, the cover descent transcends not only the material consciousness of wakefulness, dream, and deep sleep, but also the fourth realm of pure spiritual awareness. The Anandamaya Supersoul is simply an aspect of the primal Lord Govinda, as declared by him. Vishtabhyaham idam Krishnam ekaseno stita jagat. With a single fragment of myself, I pervade and support this entire universe. The Shrutis thus tactfully assert that even among the various personal forms of Godhead, Krishna is supreme. Understanding this, Narada Muni will later offer obeisances to Lord Krishna in the words Namastasmai Bhagavate Krishnaya Mala Kirtaye, even though he is standing in front of Lord Narayana Rishi. Srila Sridhar Swami concludes his comments on this verse by praying, O Lord Narayan, O Lord Narahari, persons who have attained this human form live uselessly, merely breathing like bellows. If they fail to worship you by hearing about you, chanting your glories, remembering you, and performing the other devotional practices. Now come to the sloka 18. Udaramupasateya ऋषिवर्षसु कुपर्दृशो परिसरपद्धतिं हृदयमारणयो दृशं दहनं दहरं ततबुगादनन्त तव धाम शिरः परमं पुनरय यत्समेत्य न पतन्ति कृतान्तमुखे. Shloka 18. Among the followers of the methods of set forth by great sages, those with less refined vision worship the Supreme as present in region of abdomen, while the Arunis worship him as present in the heart, in the subtle center form, which all the pranic channels emanate. From there, O unlimited Lord, these worshippers rise their consciousness upwards to the top of the head, where they can perceive you directly. Then passing through the top of the head toward the supreme destination, they reach that place from which they will never again fall to this world into the mouth of the death. Since this chapter has got 50 shlokas, and they are very nice shlokas, and Shruti praying for Lord Narayana, it is very important. So we will continue tomorrow as it is getting late. Om Namostu Anantaya Sahasramurtaye Sahasrapadakshirubha Sahasranamne Purushaya Shrude Sahasrakoti Yugadarani Namaha Akashat Paritamyadagat Sagaram Sarvadeva Namaskaraha Srikesham Prajatyo Namaha Sarva Vedeshat Punyam Sarva Tirteshu Yatpalam Tatpalam Prapti Vasana Dvasnevasya Vasdante Jagatrem Sarvabhuta Nivasosi Vaste Namaste Kaya Namacha Manasendriyerva Buddhyatmanava Prukute Sabhava Karomi Yaddat Sagalam Parasmai Narayanaayeti samarpayami, Narayanaayeti samarpayami, Narayanaayeti samarpayami. Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat.